The stars had always seemed peaceful from the observation deck of Luna Station, but Admiral Harper knew that peace was nothing more than an illusion. She stood with her hands clasped behind her back, watching the distant lights that humanity had called beautiful for thousands of years. Those same stars hid empires and fleets and civilizations that would crush Earth without a second thought if given the chance. Today, one of those civilizations had finally come knocking. The transmission had arrived 3 hours ago, and Harper had watched it 7 times already. Ambassador of the Dominion stood in the recording like a monument to alien arrogance. His scaled skin shimmered with a blue color that his species considered a mark of noble blood. His eyes were cold and calculating, and his voice carried the tone of someone who had never been told no in his entire life. The terms were simple. Humanity would surrender unconditionally within 48 hours. All military vessels would power down their weapons and submit to inspection. Human colonies across 12 star systems would be transferred to Dominion control. The population of Earth would be assigned to labor divisions based on their usefulness to the Empire. Those who resisted would be eliminated. Those who would be allowed to live as servants. Harper turned away from the window and walked back to the command center. The room was filled with officers and politicians, all of them talking over each other in voices that ranged from terrified to outraged. She let them argue for another minute before she raised her hand, and the room fell silent. Senator Williams was the first to speak once the chaos settled. He was a thin man with hair and the kind of face that suggested he had never made a difficult decision in his life. He asked if there was any possibility of negotiation, any chance that they might accept something less than total surrender. Harper told him there was not. They had conquered 37 species in the past 2 centuries, and not one of them had been offered terms that preserved their dignity or freedom. General, the commander of ground forces, slammed his fist on the table and declared that humanity would fight. His passion was admirable, but Harper could see the fear behind his eyes. The fleet numbered 3,000 warships. Humanity's entire combined navy was less than 400 vessels, and most of those were patrol craft and cargo escorts. In a straight fight, the math was simple and brutal. Harper let the arguments continue for another few minutes. The politicians wanted to buy time. The military leaders wanted to mount a defense they knew would fail. Everyone in the room was operating under the assumption that humanity had only 2 choices: surrender or die fighting. They were wrong. Harper excused herself from the meeting and walked down a long corridor to a private communication room. She sealed the door behind her and activated a console that was connected to no official network. The screen flickered to life, and she entered a code that only 7 people in the entire human government knew existed. A voice answered on the other end. It was calm and professional, asking only for confirmation of the activation order. Harper spoke a single phrase that had been chosen 40 years ago by people who understood that humanity would eventually face a moment exactly like this one. She said, "Wake them up," and the voice acknowledged the command. 300 light-years away, in the frozen darkness beyond Neptune, lights began to turn on in facilities that had been dormant for years. Engineers who had lived in isolation for decades received the signal they had been waiting for. Massive doors opened in asteroids that had been hollowed out and converted into shipyards. Reactors that had been kept at minimal power roared to life and began feeding energy to systems that the rest of humanity did not know existed. The Black Armada was waking up. Lieutenant Commander Shaw stood on the bridge of the carrier Resolute and watched the tactical display with growing dread. The fleet had positioned itself at the edge of human space like a predator waiting for its prey to make a move. Their formation was textbook perfect, designed to intercept any attack from multiple angles while protecting their command ships in the center. They were confident because they had every reason to be. Shaw had spent 6 years studying them. He had read every intelligence report, analyzed every battle recording, and interviewed every diplomat who had ever negotiated with them. He understood their psychology better than anyone else in the fleet. They saw the galaxy as a hierarchy with themselves at the top, and they measured the worth of other species by their willingness to submit. Resistance was not respected. It was simply crushed. The captain of the Resolute was a veteran named Cole. She called Shaw to her ready room and asked him for his honest assessment. He told her that the conventional fleet had no chance of stopping their weapons were more powerful, their shields were stronger, and their numbers were overwhelming. Any battle fought with the ships humanity had shown to the galaxy would end in annihilation. Captain Cole nodded slowly. She had expected that answer. Then she told Shaw something that changed everything he thought he knew about his own species. Humanity had been preparing for this day since first contact revealed the true nature of the galaxy. The governments of Earth had created a secret program funded through channels that no auditor would ever find. The engineers and scientists had been recruited and sent to hidden facilities where they developed technologies that humanity kept hidden from every alien censor and spy. The result was a fleet of warships unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Shaw asked why he was being told this now. Cole explained that the Black Armada would need tactical coordinators who understood the enemy. Shaw's years of studying made him one of the most valuable assets humanity had. He was being transferred to a new assignment effective immediately. Back on Luna Station, Admiral Harper returned to the command center. The arguments had continued in her absence, but they stopped when she walked through the door. The senator asked what humanity's response to would be. Harper told him that the response had already been sent. She activated the main display and showed them a message that was being broadcast across all human channels. It was addressed to Ambassador and the Dominion. It contained no pleas for mercy and no requests for negotiation. It simply stated that humanity declined their terms and would defend itself against any aggression. The room erupted in protest. The politicians called her reckless and demanded to know who had authorized such a response. Harper told them that authorization had been granted 40 years ago by leaders who understood that some things were worth fighting for even when the odds seemed impossible. Somewhere in the darkness between stars, 200 ships of the Black Armada began moving toward their positions. Their crews had trained for this moment their entire adult lives. They had sacrificed everything, given up families and futures, and the simple pleasures of life under an open sky. They had done it because they believed that humanity deserved to stand tall among the stars. The wanted humanity on its knees. They were about to learn how badly they had miscalculated. Captain Maria Torres had not seen sunlight in 15 years. She had not walked on grass or felt rain on her face or heard the sound of birds singing in the morning. She had given all of that up when she volunteered for the Black Armada, and she had never once regretted her decision. Some things mattered more than comfort, and freedom was at the top of that list. The Nightfall was her ship, and it was the most advanced vessel ever constructed by human hands. It measured 800 meters from bow to stern, and every centimeter of its hull was designed for one purpose: to destroy enemies that threatened humanity's survival. The ship carried weapons that could crack a planet's crust and shields that could withstand the heat of a star. Its engines could cross 100 light-years in 6 hours, and its stealth systems made it invisible to every known form of detection. Torres stood on the bridge as the activation signal came through. Around her, officers who had spent years waiting for this moment moved to their stations with quiet efficiency. There was no celebration and no fear. They had trained for this day so many times that it felt almost routine. The Nightfall was not alone. Across the hidden shipyards scattered through the outer solar system, 199 other ships were coming online. They ranged from fast destroyers to heavy battlecruisers, and every single one of them was crewed by volunteers who understood what was at stake. The Black Armada had been humanity's greatest secret for 4 decades, and now that secret was about to be revealed. Lieutenant Commander Shaw arrived at the command station aboard the orbital platform designated Shadow Base. He had been transported from the Resolute on a shuttle that used engines he had never seen before, traveling a distance that should have taken weeks in mere hours. Everything he thought he knew about human technology had been wrong. A commander named Daniel Price met him at the docking bay and escorted him through corridors that hummed with power. Price explained the situation as they walked. The fleet was holding position at the edge of human space, waiting for the surrender deadline to expire. Ambassador was supremely confident that humanity would either submit or be crushed. He had no idea that the species he considered weak and primitive had been building a weapon designed specifically to humble empires like his. Shaw asked how long humanity had been developing this technology. Price told him it had started 43 years ago, shortly after first contact. The early diplomatic missions had revealed a terrible truth about the galaxy. Most spacefaring civilizations operated on a simple principle: the strong dominated the weak, and mercy was considered a character flaw. Humanity's leaders had realized that their species would eventually face a threat too powerful to defeat with conventional weapons. The Black Armada was the answer. It represented the combined genius of 3 generations of scientists and engineers working in complete secrecy. They had developed propulsion systems that bent the laws of physics, weapons that harnessed forces most species considered theoretical, and defensive technologies that made their ships nearly invulnerable. All of this had been hidden from the galaxy because humanity understood something that most young civilizations did not. Sometimes the best weapon is the one your enemy does not know you have. Tours received the tactical briefing from Admiral Harper via secure transmission. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. They expected humanity to either surrender or fight with their visible fleet. They would do neither. Instead, the Black Armada would strike first, hitting the enemy with overwhelming force before they could react. The key was surprise. They had sophisticated sensors that could detect conventional ships at enormous distances. But the Black Armada's stealth systems operated on principles that alien technology could not detect. The ships would approach unseen, position themselves for maximum effect, and then reveal themselves at the moment of attack. Tours gathered her senior officers in the briefing room. Commander Rachel Park was her executive officer, a woman who had served in the conventional Navy before being recruited for this assignment. Lieutenant Marsh handled weapons systems with a precision that bordered on artistic. Chief Engineer Samuel Grant kept the Nightfall's revolutionary systems running despite the fact that half of them were based on theories he still did not fully understand. She told them what they already knew. They wanted to enslave humanity. They wanted to strip human colonies of resources and turn Earth's population into a servant class. They had done the same thing to dozens of other species, and they would continue doing it until someone stopped them. Today, that someone was going to be the Black Armada. The fleet began moving into position. 200 ships slipped through space like shadows, their engines producing no heat signature and their hulls reflecting no sensor pulses. They traveled in perfect formation, each captain knowing exactly where they needed to be when the attack began. Shaw worked with the tactical team on Shadow Base, analyzing the formation and identifying weaknesses. The enemy had positioned their heaviest battleships in a defensive ring around their command vessels. Their lighter cruisers patrolled the perimeter, ready to intercept any approaching threat. It was a solid formation against a conventional attack, but it had a critical flaw. They expected their enemy to approach from one direction. They expected warning from their sensors. They expected time to react and adjust their formation. The Black Armada would give them none of those things. Tours watched the countdown on her display as the fleet moved into final position. The Nightfall would lead the attack, striking at the heart of the enemy formation while other ships hit them from every angle simultaneously. It was a maneuver that would have been impossible with conventional technology, but the Black Armada was anything but conventional. Admiral Harper transmitted a final message to the fleet. She thanked them for their service and their sacrifice. She reminded them that they carried the hopes of every human who had ever looked up at the stars and dreamed of a future among them. Then she gave the order to prepare for battle. In the darkness of space, 200 ships powered up their weapons and prepared to make history. The crews checked their systems one final time and confirmed their readiness. Every captain reported green across the board. Torres took her seat in the command chair and felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle onto her shoulders. Billions of lives depended on what happened in the next few hours. The future of her species would be determined by the choices she and her fellow captains made. She had no doubts. She had trained for this moment her entire adult life. The Black Armada was ready. The had demanded that humanity kneel. They were about to discover that some species would rather die on their feet than live on their knees. And today, dying would not be necessary. Today, humanity would teach the galaxy a lesson it would never forget. Ambassador stood on the command deck of his flagship and savored the moment. The deadline was approaching, and humanity had sent no response beyond their foolish declaration of defiance. He had expected nothing less from a species too young and arrogant to understand their place in the natural order. Soon they would learn, as so many others had learned before them. His fleet stretched across space in a formation that had crushed civilizations far older and more advanced than humanity. 3,000 warships, each one crewed by warriors who had spent their lives perfecting the art of conquest. The Dominion had built its empire on the simple principle that strength was the only thing that mattered in the galaxy. The weak existed to serve the strong, and humanity was about to discover just how weak they truly were. A junior officer approached and reported that the deadline had expired, allowed himself a thin smile. He gave the order to begin the assault. The first targets would be the outer colonies, the scattered mining stations and research outposts that humanity had spread across a dozen star systems. They would fall quickly, and their destruction would send a message to Earth about what awaited those who the Dominion. The fleet began to move. Heavy battleships powered up their weapons while lighter cruisers spread out to scout ahead. Everything proceeded according to plan. Had conducted this operation dozens of times against dozens of species, and it always ended the same way. Resistance, then desperation, then surrender, then servitude. He never saw the attack coming. The nightfall emerged from nothing. One moment the space ahead of the fleet was empty, and the next moment a massive human warship was there, weapons already firing. The first salvo struck a battleship in the forward line and tore through its shields as if they did not exist. The vessel exploded in a ball of fire that lit up the darkness. Then more ships appeared. They materialized all around the formation, emerging from stealth in perfect coordination. 200 human warships revealed themselves in the span of 3 seconds, and all of them opened fire simultaneously. Captain Torres watched the destruction unfold on her tactical display. The first exchange had destroyed over 100 enemy vessels, and they were still trying to understand what was happening. Their sensors had given them no warning. Their defensive formation had been designed to meet threats from known directions, but the Black Armada had attacked from everywhere at once. She ordered the Nightfall to press forward, driving deeper into the enemy formation. The ship's weapons fired continuously, each shot finding its target with devastating precision. Battleships that had conquered entire civilizations were reduced to debris in seconds. Lieutenant Commander Shaw coordinated the attack from Shadow Base, feeding tactical data to the fleet in real time. He watched the enemy formation crumble as ship after ship was destroyed. They were trying to regroup, trying to bring their superior numbers to bear, but the Black Armada was too fast and too coordinated. Ambassador screamed at his officers to restore order. His flagship shuddered as weapons fire struck its shields, and for the first time in his career, he felt something he had never experienced before: fear. The humans were supposed to be weak. Their technology was supposed to be primitive. They were supposed to surrender or die in a futile gesture of defiance. This was not supposed to happen. Admiral Harper monitored the battle from Luna Station. The tactical display showed the fleet in chaos, ships scattering in all directions as the Black Armada tore through them. The plan was working even better than she had hoped. The enemy had been so confident in their superiority that they had never considered the possibility of a surprise attack. She transmitted new orders to the fleet. The command ships were trying to retreat to a safer position, and she wanted them cut off. If escaped, he would bring reinforcements. This battle needed to end decisively, with no chance for the enemy to recover. Tors acknowledged the order and adjusted her course. The Nightfall's engines pushed the ship to incredible speeds, closing the distance to the retreating command vessels. Other ships of the Black Armada moved to support her, forming a net that the enemy could not escape. Commander Rachel Park reported damage to the forward shields. They were fighting back now, their initial shock fading as training and discipline took over. They were still outmatched technologically, but they were not giving up. Tors respected that even as she ordered her weapons to continue firing. Lieutenant Marsh found his rhythm at the weapons console. Each shot was calculated for maximum effect, targeting critical systems and weak points in enemy armor. He had trained for this his entire adult life, running simulations against enemies that he was told might never actually exist. Now those simulations were reality, and he discovered that he was very good at his job. The battle raged across thousands of kilometers of space. Explosions lit up the darkness like a deadly fireworks display. Ships on both sides took damage and some were destroyed, but the balance was overwhelmingly in humanity's favor. The Black Armada's technological advantage was simply too great to overcome. Shaw watched the enemy numbers drop on his display. What had started as 3,000 ships was now less than 2,000, and the number kept falling. They were learning what it felt like to be on the wrong end of overwhelming force. They were experiencing the same helplessness they had inflicted on so many other species. Ordered his remaining forces to form a defensive sphere around the command ships. It was a desperate measure, sacrificing mobility for protection. He needed time to think, time to understand what had gone wrong and how to salvage the situation. Tors saw the formation change and recognized it for what it was, the final stand of an enemy who knew he was losing. She contacted Admiral Harper and requested permission to press the attack. The Admiral granted it without hesitation. The Black Armada closed in on the defensive sphere like wolves surrounding wounded prey. Their weapons found gaps in the formation and exploited them ruthlessly. One by one, the ships protecting were destroyed or disabled. Chief Engineer Samuel Grant reported that the Nightfall's power systems were holding despite the continuous weapons fire. The ship had been designed to fight battles exactly like this one, and it was performing beyond expectations. He told Tors they could keep this up for hours if necessary. Tors thanked him and returned her attention to the battle. The sphere was collapsing. Ships were trying to break away and flee, but the Black Armada was everywhere. There was no escape. For the first time in centuries, the Dominion was losing a war, and they were not just losing, they were being annihilated. Watched his empire's pride burn around him and finally understood the terrible truth. Humanity had never been weak. They had simply been waiting for the right moment to show their strength, and now that moment had arrived. The battle was far from over, but its outcome was no longer in doubt. The Black Armada would finish what they had started. The defensive sphere was breaking apart. Ambassador watched his tactical display with growing horror as ship after ship vanished from the formation. His fleet had been reduced to less than 1,000 vessels, and the humans showed no sign of slowing their assault. He had sent an emergency transmission to the Dominion's core worlds requesting immediate reinforcements. The response had been discouraging. Additional fleets could be assembled and dispatched, but they would not arrive for at least 3 weeks. Did not have 3 weeks. He was not certain he had 3 hours. The command deck shook as another impact struck the flagship's shields. His officers reported that power was fluctuating and weapon systems were beginning to fail. The ship that had carried him to victory in 100 battles was dying around him, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Captain Torres pushed the Nightfall deeper into the crumbling enemy formation. Her ship had taken damage during the battle, but Chief Engineer Grant was performing miracles keeping the critical systems online. The weapons were still firing and the engines were still running, and that was all she needed. Commander Rachel Park coordinated with the other ships of the Black Armada, ensuring that no gap in the attack allowed the enemy to regroup. She had been a tactical officer in the conventional Navy before being recruited for this assignment, and she had never imagined participating in a battle of this scale. The destruction surrounding them was almost beyond comprehension. Lieutenant Commander Shaw transmitted a new analysis to the fleet from Shadow Base. He had identified the location of his flagship based on the communication patterns in the enemy formation. The ship was heavily protected, but its defenders were being stripped away one by one. Soon it would be vulnerable. Admiral Harper reviewed the analysis and made a decision. She ordered the Black Armada to concentrate their attack on the enemy command structure. If they could destroy and his senior officers, the remaining ships would lose coordination. The battle would effectively be over. Torres acknowledged the order and adjusted her course toward the flagship. The Nightfall's engines pushed the ship forward at speeds that would have been impossible for any vessel the galaxy had ever seen before. She was closing the distance faster than the enemy could react. Saw the human ship approaching and ordered every available weapon to target it. His remaining escorts moved to intercept, forming a wall of fire between the flagship and the attacker. For a moment, it seemed like the desperate defense might succeed. Then the other ships of the Black Armada arrived. They emerged from different angles, catching the escorts in a crossfire that decimated their ranks. The wall of defenders collapsed in seconds, leaving his flagship exposed. Torres ordered Lieutenant Marsh to target the enemy's shield generators, the weapons officer sending a concentrated barrage at the critical systems. The first shots weakened the shields. The second shots collapsed them entirely. The third shot struck the hull directly. The flagship shuddered and began to list to one side. Internal explosions rippled through its structure as systems failed catastrophically. Gripped his command chair as the deck tilted beneath him, watching everything he had built crumble into ruins. Shaw monitored the enemy flagship's status and reported that it was critically damaged. The vessel would not survive much longer. He recommended that Admiral Harper offer them a chance to surrender, if only to gather intelligence about their empire's capabilities. Harper considered the suggestion but ultimately rejected it. They had offered humanity no mercy. They had demanded total submission and promised enslavement. Showing them compassion now might be interpreted as weakness, and humanity could not afford to appear weak in the eyes of a galaxy that respected only strength. She ordered the Black Armada to finish the job. Torres felt no joy as she gave the command to fire. The Nightfall's weapons struck the flagship in its weakest points, tearing through armor and bulkheads and flesh. The great vessel that had carried Ambassador across the stars came apart in a series of explosions that left nothing but debris. The remaining ships saw their commander die and their morale shattered. Some tried to flee, pushing their engines to maximum in a desperate attempt to escape the killing field. Others continued fighting, either too proud or too afraid to surrender. A few simply stopped moving, their crews frozen by shock and disbelief. The Black Armada showed them no mercy. Every ship that ran was hunted down. Every ship that fought was destroyed. The battle became a systematic elimination of what had once been the greatest fleet the Dominion had ever assembled. Commander Park reported that enemy resistance was collapsing across the entire engagement zone. Ships were surrendering now, powering down their weapons and broadcasting their submission on all frequencies. Torres ordered her forces to accept surrenders where practical but to maintain combat readiness until the last hostile vessel was neutralized. Shaw watched the final numbers scroll across his display. They had arrived with 3,000 warships, confident that humanity would kneel before their might. Now less than 200 vessels remained operational, and most of those had surrendered. The rest were debris scattered across millions of kilometers of space. Admiral Harper allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. The plan had worked. The Black Armada had performed exactly as designed, delivering a decisive victory against an enemy that should have been unstoppable. Humanity had proven that it would not be conquered, not today, not ever. She transmitted a message to the surviving vessels. The terms were simple. They would withdraw from human space immediately. They would inform their government that any future aggression would be met with the same response. They would remember this day and tell others what happened to those who threatened humanity. The surrendered ships acknowledged the terms and began their retreat. They moved slowly, their crews still in shock from the catastrophe they had witnessed. Many of them would spend the rest of their lives trying to understand how everything had gone so wrong. Torres watched them go and felt the exhaustion of battle finally catching up with her. The Nightfall had survived, though it would need extensive repairs before it could fight again. Her crew had performed magnificently under pressure that would have broken lesser people. The Black Armada began gathering its forces and assessing the damage. They had won, but victory always came with a cost. Good people had died today, ships had been lost, and the scars of battle would take time to heal. But humanity remained free. That was what mattered. The galaxy was watching, and it had seen something it would never forget. A species that had been dismissed as young and weak had revealed hidden strength that rivaled the greatest empires. The balance of power had shifted in a single day. The Black Armada had done what it was created to do. Now it would fade back into the shadows, ready to emerge again if another threat appeared. The debris field stretched across space like a graveyard of ambition and arrogance. 3,000 warships had been reduced to scattered wreckage drifting through the void, a monument to the price of underestimating humanity. Admiral Harper stood on the observation deck of Luna Station and watched the distant flickers of light where rescue operations were recovering survivors from destroyed vessels. The battle had ended 6 hours ago, but Harper had not slept. There was too much to do, too many decisions to make, too many consequences to consider. Humanity had won a victory that would reshape the galaxy, but victory always came with responsibilities that extended far beyond the battlefield. The politicians had already started their arguments. Senator Williams wanted to sue for peace immediately, offering generous terms to the in exchange for a formal treaty. General wanted to press the advantage, using the Black Armada to strike at enemy territory before they could recover. Others suggested everything from isolation to expansion, each proposal reflecting more fear than wisdom. Harper listened to them all and then made her own recommendation. Humanity would neither retreat nor advance. They would hold their ground, maintain their strength, and wait to see how the galaxy responded. The message had been sent. Now it was time to see who had been paying attention. Captain Maria Torres brought the Nightfall home to a welcome she had never expected. Ships of the conventional navy lined up to salute her as she approached Earth, their crews lining the observation decks to witness the return of heroes they had not known existed. Torres felt uncomfortable with the attention, but understood its necessity. People needed symbols, and the Black Armada had become the greatest symbol humanity had ever produced. She docked the ship at a repair facility that had been kept secret until now and finally allowed herself to rest. Her crew dispersed to find their families and friends, some of whom had believed them dead for over a decade. There would be reunions and explanations and difficult conversations in the days ahead. Lieutenant Commander Shaw received his promotion in a small ceremony attended only by those with the highest security clearances. Admiral Harper pinned the new rank insignia to his collar and told him that his analysis had been crucial to the victory. He would be given command of his own vessel, a fast cruiser named the Sentinel that would patrol the borders of human space. Shaw accepted the honor with quiet pride. He had spent years studying, though, because he believed that understanding the enemy was the first step to defeating them. That belief had proven correct in ways he never imagined. Now he would carry that knowledge forward, ready to apply it again if new threats emerged. The galaxy reacted to the battle with a mixture of shock and respect. The Dominion had been considered one of the most powerful empires in the known universe, and humanity had defeated them decisively. Other civilizations began reassessing their assumptions about the young species from the small blue planet. Ambassadors arrived from a dozen different governments, all of them eager to establish diplomatic relations with Earth. Some came offering trade agreements and mutual defense pacts. Others came seeking technology or alliance against their own enemies. A few came simply to observe, to study the species that had accomplished something remarkable. Harper met with each delegation personally, treating them with respect but revealing nothing about humanity's true capabilities. The Black Armada would remain largely secret, its ships returning to their hidden bases to await future need. The galaxy would know that humanity had hidden strength, but they would not know its full extent. That uncertainty was itself a weapon. The Dominion sent a formal message acknowledging the outcome of the battle. They did not apologize or offer reparations, but they agreed to recognize human sovereignty over claimed territories. Ambassador was listed among the dead, his arrogance buried with him in the debris field that bore witness to his failure. Torres spent her first week back on Earth rediscovering things she had almost forgotten. The smell of rain on summer grass, the sound of children laughing in a park, the simple pleasure of walking down a street without walls closing in around her. She had given up these things willingly, but reclaiming them felt like coming back to life. She visited the memorial that had been established for the crews who died in the battle. 23 ships of the Black Armada had been destroyed, along with nearly 4,000 crew members. Their names were engraved on a wall of black stone that caught the light of the setting sun. Torres touched each name and silently thanked them for their sacrifice. Commander Rachel Park joined her at the memorial. The two women had served together for years, sharing the isolation and uncertainty of life in the hidden fleet. Now they stood together in the open air, no longer bound by the secrets that had defined their existence. Park asked what Torres planned to do now. The captain thought about the question before answering. The Black Armada would need to be rebuilt and expanded. New ships would be constructed, new crews would be trained, and new technologies would be developed. The victory over them was not the end of anything. It was merely the beginning. Torres told her friend that she would continue serving for as long as she was needed. The galaxy was a dangerous place, filled with empires and powers that would happily subjugate humanity if given the chance. The Black Armada existed to ensure that chance never came. Shaw took command of the Sentinel and began his first patrol along the border. His crew was young but capable, eager to prove themselves worthy of serving under an officer who had helped coordinate the greatest victory in human history. He trained them rigorously, preparing them for challenges that might never come, but that they needed to be ready for regardless. Admiral Harper retired from active duty 3 months after the battle. She had spent her entire career preparing for the moment that had finally arrived, and now that it had passed, she felt ready to rest. She took a small house by the ocean and spent her days watching the waves roll in, content in the knowledge that she had done her part. On Earth, life continued much as it had before. Most people knew only the basic facts of what had happened. An alien fleet had threatened humanity, and humanity had defeated them. They did not know about the Black Armada or the decades of secret preparation that made victory possible. They simply went about their lives, secure in the belief that their world was safe. That security was not an illusion. Humanity had proven that it would not be conquered, not by thee or anyone else. The message had been sent to every corner of the galaxy, written in fire and debris and the broken hulls of enemy ships. They had wanted humanity on its knees. Instead, humanity had risen to meet them and shown them what happens to those who mistake patience for weakness and silence for surrender. The stars still glittered in the night sky, beautiful and mysterious, and filled with dangers that most people would never understand. But humanity looked up at those stars with new confidence now, knowing that whatever challenges awaited them in the darkness, they would face those challenges standing tall. The Black Armada watched over them from the shadows, ready to emerge again whenever duty called. Humanity would never kneel.